Okay, so we're back over here. It is March, what is it, March 1st. And we're back over here. Got Lance Conley, Roderick Edwards. And over the weekend, I think it was Saturday, Max King, who is probably the biggest architect of the full preterist system, of the system known as covenant eschatology. He passed away in the early afternoon hours. And there's been some stuff filtering through on various channels, various parts of the web, just concerning his legacy, concerning his contributions to covenant eschatology and theology in general. There was some stuff posted by his son, Larry Siegel. He posted some stuff. Don Preston gave a very brief encomium of Max King on his morning musings. I believe it was yesterday. Even Sam Frost posted some testimonial as to how he had worked with King years ago. But today's topic is going to be more or less concerned with Preterism's influencers and founders. I have an outline over here. And Roderick Edwards, thanks for providing this. I guess you could open this up as to, just give us a brief explanation of Preterism and its history, the history of Preterism, so that then we could segue into Max King and his legacy.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And it's important that we acknowledge that Max King did contribute in a great way towards the thing we call the Preterist movement. Whether we like it or not, it's important to know that, because we can understand better how it's developed. But again, Preterism, just a brief explanation, and let me know, you guys, if you agree with this, is the belief that most, if not all, the New Testament prophecies, or actually all the biblical prophecies in the Bible, have already been fulfilled, at least by the year AD 70, culminating in the destruction of the Jewish or Herodian temple in the year AD 7. Did you say that's correct?
Yep, that's what it is to me when I hear full preterism or covenant eschatology. So,
all right.
Yep, sounds pretty correct. Okay.
And so we had Max King, who is part of the Church of Christ denomination. I know sometimes they don't like to have it called denomination, but it's a denomination. They have certain things they hold in common. For example, a lot of them hold in common that you can't eat in the worship area. It's disrespectful. So there's various things that, and a lot of them say they believe they lose your salvation. You can't actually keep it. You have to keep on. You have to keep it up. You have to maintain it. I don't want to really go into Church of Christ. I'm not here to talk about that, but I want to realize that it is a denomination. That's where Max King came out of. In the 1970s, when he started writing his book, I think it was The Spirit of Prophecy, and there was a couple other ones he wrote at that time, which really shook up his denomination. There were a lot of people coming out. It's called the AD 70 doctrine. They were heresy. They were all against it, and they wrote against it and talked against it and debated him and everything else. But his influence didn't start affecting the rest of us in evangelical Reformed Christianity until the 1990s, with the symposium, eschatology symposium, that happened in 1993, very near where I am right now, in a place called Mount Dora, Florida, where Max King was there. There was R.C. Sproul Sr., Ed Stevens, which is part of the Full Preterist group. I think Kenneth Gentry was there, if I recall right, and a couple other men. And they wanted to hear out what was going on, especially after J.S. Russell, which is something from the 1800s. He wrote a book called the Parousia, depending how you want to pronounce it, and which has become kind of like the lifeblood of Preterism, because he wrote so really articulately about the Preterist movement. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. Yep.
Okay. So that's the reason why we think it's important that we discuss Max King, because if you call yourself a preterist, especially a full preterist nowadays, and you act like, hey, I don't know anything about Max King, I don't care, it's kind of disingenuous, because if somebody had that much influence on the movement that you claim you're part of, you can't say, well, I just read it in the Bible and that's all I need to know. This guy has articulated the thing that you supposedly believe better than you have. He has had people challenge him, approach him. He's worked through it probably more so than any of us even have. And we've been working through it for many years. I've been working through Preterism from all sides for 30 years, and I don't hold a candle to Max King. I get that. I don't even hold a candle to Don Preston when it comes to debating it and having it debated. And so I would say, if I'm going to look at full preterism from its side, I want to hear from one of its experts, Don Preston or Max King. So that's the reason we're here today, to talk about the influencers and the founders. And when people say, well, founders, well, all over Max King's books, on the backs of them and everything else, it talks about how he founded the covenant eschatology, i.e. preterism. So he is considered a founder of it. And the fact that he founded as an articulator of it. So go ahead, somebody else launch off here. I think
Yeah,
I spoke long enough.
he definitely founded it because like before that, the only full preterist that you have in like documentation is like Robert Townley, right? And I don't even know if King read him. I don't know. Like he might have because they're both Unitarian. So maybe when King went Unitarian and joined that church after he left the COC, like maybe that's where he got some of it. I don't know.
Could have
Maybe.
been from, hey, it could have been from, a lot of that stuff they could have got from Milton Terry, because when I worked at SMU
That's true.
and I was working in the libraries over there, and Milton Terry is still a very, at least among the Methodists, but Milton Terry is still very respectable, commentator. His book on hermeneutics is considered really the horn book, as it were, of hermeneutics among some seminarians. But this is the thing, in any standard theological library, Milton Terry's work would have been represented. Possibly J. Stuart Russell as well. I don't know exactly where he got it from, but I do know there was and I shared this with you guys this morning. There was at some point, I think it might have been in the 60s or very early 70s, there was a farmer named Clifton Voss, who basically he had some correspondence with King, mail correspondence. They exchanged ideas. And I remember this being posted a long time ago at Todd Dennis's website. Some of that correspondence was actually documented, where Voss was telling King, for 2,000 years, Christians have been living in a graveyard religion. Now, shortly after King's, probably I think it might have been his first book was published, Voss passed away, and he had his chart, with his prophecy chart, engraved on his tombstone. So we've seen this, Roderick, remember, with Kelly Burke's, rest his soul, but he had his prophecy chart engraved on his tombstone. So this is not just something where, will you believe, this is your faith, or an articulation of your faith, and it's, this is something you take so seriously, you get it literally engraved on your tombstone. But he may have influenced King as well.
Yeah, preterism is not just a side issue that you tack on. It's not just about eschatology. It affects it affects everything. And yeah, it's obvious by these things. And in some respects, it should. If you're a Christian, for example, your Christianity shouldn't be just affecting you on Sundays. It should always affect you. So I'm not slamming them for that, but to try to pretend it's just a side issue and, hey, I don't really think about it much, is disingenuous. Yes, you do, to the point that you have it embossed on your gravestone. And so it's very important when we talk about these things that it's not, hey, it's just a eschatology issue. It's not a salvation issue. I've seen a debate not too long ago between Don Preston and Ed Stevens, where Stevens basically calls out Don Preston's concept that Jesus is not in a physical form and never went to a physical form to heaven. And Stevens basically says that the gospel is at stake. If the gospel is at stake between these two men, they can't just be buddy-buddy. It's a major issue. So, and that's the reason we discuss these things. And we're not hostile. We're just trying to understand why people say what they say. And as Don Preston says, I don't care what people believe. I don't care what tradition. I just believe what I believe. Well, why do you believe what you believe? I want to know. Where does it come from?
And you sent some great information, Roderick. So I'm going to do real quick. So I'm just going to share my screen, and you guys could chime in because we've got a few tabs. I've got a few tabs over here to share. Let me just go ahead, and I believe he's going to give me everything I need. Let's see.
Right. And I'm also going to say too, if you read Cross and Parousia, Max King says point blank that he listened to the Jesus seminars and that his faith was very shaken by it. So if you don't know what the Jesus seminars are, they were these historical critics that they basically not every one of them, but a lot of them tried to make the claim that Jesus was not a historical person, that the gospels were all made up. And some of them did say that there was a historical Jesus, but they basically denied the miracles. They denied all that. And in at least one of them, they talked about Matthew 24, it doesn't make sense if we're taking it in this very literal, strict sense. And when King read this, or when he listened to these deals and stuff, he literally thought to himself, this makes sense to me. So how am I going to fix Christianity? because he thought that it was all messed up. And being in the Church of Christ, and I'm not attacking the denomination, I'm not attacking anybody in it, but a lot of people in the Church of Christ do think that there was like a great apostasy. They think that everybody was wrong until they got there. Like, and I'm not dissing just people listening. I'm not dissing you. I'm just saying how some of the people do operate in those circles in the Restoration movement stuff. And Max King was definitely part of that. So like he also puts in his Cross and Parousia that he doesn't trust any of the Catholic sources. So like that is why he thought the way that he did about some stuff. So I wanted to point that out just because anyways.
And it's a common, just real quickly, it's a common, we've heard this quite often, as a matter of fact, in our discussions with full preterists, is, that everybody was wrong. They came along, they discovered truth. But we hear this quite a bit. As a matter of fact, in Tim King's book, it's called "Give Me This Mountain," he wrote that Max's fearless quest, as he refused to be intimidated by the giants of dogma, found a way to unravel the Rubik's cube of biblical eschatology. How often do we hear this, where somebody comes along and they claim to have, discovered the truth, discovered the, the secret code of the scriptures, for the first time. But that's what we hear a lot of. And Roderick, I know you've heard this probably more than anybody else, is that, this kind of idea that Christianity had to be sort of reclaimed from, it's almost like an evolutionary sort of paradigm that they're working off of, or sort of like you have all these conflicting ideas, and then you have this process of natural selection where you've got these wrong ideas that get thrown out, and then you gradually have this truth is just emerges from the wreckage, I guess you would say, of historical Christianity. They were pretty much operating off of this understanding. And everybody I've talked to in the past few months seems to have this sort of conspiratorial kind of belief, understanding of Christianity, where it's like, the truth is not what you've been instructed it was. The truth is not what this is not your father's or grandfather's Christianity, where, times are changing, like Bob Dylan used to say.
Yeah, they say it's been hidden, which, funny enough, the Gnostics would say that too, but yeah.
So yeah, it's either been hidden or, they were just the Christians of the past were too dumb to understand it. So it's either been purposely corrupted or they were too dumb, one or the other. So you basically have a God who's sovereign, who has no ability to make sure that his people believe it. For example, I was a training supervisor for about 20 years. And so I had a team of 4 trainers underneath me, and they trained probably 16 people a day, every day almost. And sometimes they'd come to me, these people just aren't getting it. I was like, well, you need to figure out how to make that material become alive to them. You need to figure out how to get to them if they're not getting it. So I was always blaming the trainer more than the people who weren't getting it. So in this case, preterists are blaming God, Jesus, and the apostles for being poor trainers about what the eschatological plan is. Because they'll say, oh, they didn't. And then they always try to point to the Jews and say, well, the Jews didn't understand the Messiah was coming. Well, the problem with that thing is the Jews were under the veil of Moses. They were under shadow and type. And then Jesus came and said, look, I'm coming here, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm coming to reveal and fulfill. Jesus didn't come to bring more shadow and type, more blurry, behind the veil Moses concepts. He came to, here's what it's all been about. But preterists want us to believe that we're still kind of figuring it all out, but we're not. If we are still figuring out, who knows what Christianity will be like in the year 2050 or even more, 3000. What will it be like if that lasts that long, if we're still figuring it out?
Well, and I'll say this too, like the influences that I see in full preterism, like Max King, for example, his CBV view is like, well, I'm going to go down the New Age path, right? So he can like accept evolution, he can accept like Buddha, all this other stuff, right? Like at the end of it, he did go like New Age, universalist, like everything's fine, kind of like that kind of deal. And then you get like Don Preston, who tries to make it evangelical, but like lots of issues there, obviously. but you also get like Holger Neubauer, and you get like what's that name? Robert Price. I think that's his name. It's something Price, I think. But anyways, like they're all former Jehovah's Witnesses. And so you also get like Mormons, former Mormons that have become.
What's the connection there, though? Just like as you brought up, the connection is they all believe that the true church failed somewhere and they had to
Yeah.
restore it. All those connect, whether it's Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, some of the Church of Christ. I'm not saying all, but it's latent inside Church of Christ, whether they want to admit it or not. It's latent in there that something went wrong and they had to restore it. And so you
Right.
have that all over the place. And then they'll say things like this: well, you reformer people, you Protestants, you also believe that. Otherwise, Martin Luther didn't do anything new. The justification by faith alone was the default position. It's the default position that God, the God, whatever God you want to call it, is supreme and can do whatever he wants with his creation. It wasn't until later people started thinking, well, maybe we have to do some good works to get to God. Well, that was never part of Christianity. Good works was something overlaid Christianity. If anything, that's the new part. That the old part is God can do whatever he wants with you as a creature.
Yeah. Agreed.
And, one of the things I know I had mentioned this to you guys earlier, but, I had never read Max King. I was never I never interacted with any of these COC guys. And I attribute that at least partly to my Baptistic faith, because at the time I accepted hyper-preterism, I was, in a Baptist church. I had just gotten into the ministry, and my pastor and I had discovered the doctrines of grace. We were reading writers like A.W. Pink and Charles Spurgeon, even, L.R. Shelton. And we were moving in the direction of high Calvinism. So we were, firm on the sovereignty of God, the providence of God. Had anybody suggested to me at that time that the COC guy, basically, that church down the street with the lady with a funny hairdo, if anybody had suggested to me that those guys had actually cracked the code of scripture revelation, I would have laughed at them. But, when it came time to accepting the doctrines of preterism and hyper-preterism, I completely bypassed those guys. I was reading J. Stuart Russell. I was reading John Lightfoot, John Gill even. Those were the ones that led me toward a more preteristic understanding of scripture. But, the thing about the COC guys, what I've never really been able to understand, and Roderick, maybe you can expatiate on this, is how you could be, sovereign grace, believe in the sovereignty of God, believe in the providence of God, believe that God is in control and that he's preserving his church. And so many folks that I know who have this sort of reformed background are sort of like hobnobbing behind the scenes with these COC guys who believe that everything kind of just went, Christianity really went AWOL in AD 70. And what I could never really understand is, where's the connection? Is there a connection? Is there some kind of secret, liaison or whatnot? I got a guy that comes to my channel every once in a while, Lance. I think he may come to yours too. His name's Antonio. And I don't want to start getting into conspiracy theories or anything, but he keeps telling me that, Don Preston's a Mason and Max King was a Mason. And I don't know anything. Okay. I'm not, I know what Jack Chick thinks about Masons, but I don't think necessarily that every one of them is in some secret plot to undermine the nations of the world. But all that would mean, in my understanding, is that if Max King was a Mason, or if David Chilton was a Mason, all that would mean was that they might have some kind of more sinister motive, not necessarily that they would, but leaving that all aside, because I don't want to go down the Jack Chick road of this discussion. But is there some kind of liaison, some kind of, solidarity between some of these more extreme, characters within the Reform camp, people like Gary DeMar and David Chilton, and then people on the other side of the fence, like Max King and those folks?
I think, to be honest, aside from Don Preston, I think that the COC has really not been so much. It's not so much that they're inside of the circle. It's that the full preterists are always going inside of their circle, because it's so much easier in a Church of Christ denomination to infiltrate, because, well, I just use the Bible and that's what I use, and I don't have a creed and I don't have this. So then they don't really have like any, like I've asked multiple people like, why do you believe what you believe? And I'm trying not to be mean, but I haven't gotten any legitimate good answers just yet. So, but I think the big connection is that, like, Max King was Church of Christ, so there was some Church of Christ people that, fought against him. Some people were like, "Ooh, I like what he says," But then what he really got was when R.C. Sproul Sr. comes in and he lets him come into those conferences with him, and like puts him even in his footnotes when he writes the last days about Jesus or whatever. And so that gives him like a pretty big platform, because R.C. Sproul Sr. That's where I learned a lot of full preterism from, because I was in the Reformed partial preterist stuff from the get-go. And basically I was just like, I read Sproul and I kind of was looking at preterism, and then, well, lo and behold, Don Preston pops up and all these other people pop up, and then the algorithms on Facebook and YouTube pop up, and it's like, oh, all these people are, popping into my little circle here. And that's how I got into it, pretty much. But yeah, go ahead.
So the connection point here that we're looking for, that looks like it's almost like it's conspiracy, but it's not. The connection point, the reason you see this, that's the reason I mentioned the Mount Dora 1993 symposium, because before that, you really couldn't find, I think we had a chart up here a moment ago, that there Google has an algorithm which shows you books all the way back to the 1800s and words they used them. And the words preterist and preterism didn't really show up until the 1990s for the most part in any books at all. They weren't. So when people say preterism's always existed in Christianity, not as a term, it has not. If you look at if you got the Google NG, a couple over right there, one more over, keep going to the right, keep going. Nope, keep going, one more. There you go.
Yeah.
So you see right there. So you see, this is Google's algorithm looking at all these books all the way back to the 1800s. This is you have preterist in, I can't see, preterist in the blue and preterism in the red. These terms were not even used in most books until you see it just jumps up dramatically in the year 1990.
Yeah,
1970 a little bit, because but we know that there's some preterist writings in the 1800s, J.S. Russell and you guys Townsend, we mentioned those, but the actual concept of preterism didn't really hit the Reformed people until the 1990s, shortly after this. The reason why is because of this concept of sola scriptura. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sola scriptura, but unfortunately what happened, people believe sola scriptura means it's just me and my Bible, which is the same concept that Church of Christ has. We've seen Don Preston, I don't believe in tradition. I don't care what people say. I don't care what people believe. I just believe what I believe in my Bible. That's private interpretation. That's church in a vacuum. That's Christianity in a vacuum. That would be like somebody going, hey, I don't care what baseball is. I have this thing here in my hand and I call it a wiffle. I call it a wiffle. It's not a bat. I call it a wiffle. I call it a stick. This is not a ball. They just make up their terms because that's how they look at it. And that's what's happened. And you have these people in the Reform start coming in the 1990s because they have a misconstrued concept of sola scriptura. One of the major things that Martin Luther said is in his defense in the book, in the Diet of Worms, was, here I stand on scripture and plain reason. If those two things aren't put together, then of course you're going to come to private interpretations. So this is the connection that we're seeing here, and the reason why you can have a lot of people who aren't from Church of Christ but become the same outcome as Church of Christ with this when it comes to preterism.
Right. And we've got a picture here of some of the leaders. I guess this was taken probably, I would imagine, in perhaps the early to mid 90s. When you've got King right here in the background. You've got, I believe that's Jack Scott, William Bell, there's Larry Siegel, there's Don Preston, and I believe, I would imagine, I think this is David Chilton.
Yeah, I think it's David
Yeah.
Chilton, big
Chilton.
Dominion guy.
Don't know who this guy is right here, but anyways, I mean, I'm pretty good at, like judging body language and stuff. The way he's here in the front, Chilton's here in the front. He's got his hands folded. He's kind of, standing up straight and tall with a smile on. I would imagine this guy here is probably, at the point when this picture was taken, this guy here is probably the main mover and shaker rather than Max King. Of course, that's just a theory. But
Max King never got out of his denomination much. I mean, obviously Chilton affected a whole lot of things at the time. It's the reason why some of his handlers, Gary North, got so upset when he basically moved into full preterism. That's this picture of Larry Siegel. Not sorry, Larry, if you listen to this, but dude, you have way more hair there than you do now. He's lost a really
Right.
quick.
Yeah, and so Larry actually was a very good post because he shows, I mean, Max King, I mean, he looks like one of your, your typical, well-respected, revered, pastoral men.
Grandfatherly type guy, and he probably is.
Yeah,
I'm not calling anything
somebody,
bad about him, but he's just he operated in a vacuum.
yeah, somebody you would go to, to learn more about the ministry, if not Christ himself. But of course, we don't want to speak too highly of him because we know that he did promote false doctrine for, over 5 decades.
I think
Yeah, I mean,
partly
I'll say
because
this,
he were operating in a vacuum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say this too. Like he was a good speaker because I've listened to some of his old 1970s sermons. Like they were good. Like for speaking purposes, he'd speaking way better than I would in a sermon, stuff like that. So I mean, he was a good preacher for what it's worth.
Did they teach him not to point like this? Here's how you're supposed to talk.
I don't know because it was all just audio, but
Okay.
yeah, I bet he did.
You're never supposed to do that. You're always supposed
Yeah.
to. We're watching politicians. They always do that.
Right. I mean, I figure sometimes he might have gone like, yes, this is the word of God,
But
maybe.
most of Church of Christ debaters or speakers like that. I mean, Don Preston, you see him, he cleans up most people because of the fact that they're not prepared for him. They figure, oh, this is that preterism stuff, I'll get rid of it. But the problem is, I'm not trying to plug my own book because that's not what this one's about, but how to debate a preterist. I go into the reason why they will constantly lose, because if you go in saying, it's just me and my Bible, well, you've lost already, because I guarantee you, Don Preston has debated more people than you probably have, and he's put his views to the paces. Doesn't mean they're right, but he's put them through the pace. So he's quick wit on the responses that you're going to try to throw at him. He's already got it all laid out there for you, and you maybe don't. So
plus, I noticed that Don has a particular strategy, and he uses a lot of what I've learned to call over the years scorched earth apologetics, where you basically use an argument like it's a logical fallacy, but if such and such didn't happen when Jesus said it would, then
he's a liar.
He's a liar, right? And this is the same kind of argument that, like, say, an atheist would use. But I call them scorched earth apologetics because what it's trying to do is it's trying to cut down everything. It's trying to burn your path forward through all.
So then you start compromising, saying, "Oh well, I don't want Jesus to be a liar." So, but it's Derek Lambert, who was a full preterist and left altogether to atheism, and I think he's spot on when he said preterism was a last-ditch effort to save the Savior. It's some people who thought that Jesus was a liar. Well, how can we fix that? Let's make it timing issue. That's what we'll do. We'll fix the timing. So
right. And of course, one thing I wanted to point out, I think I pointed it out last podcast, was, of course, that's based on the false dilemma where you only have two choices. If my view isn't correct, then this view must be correct. Whereas you may have multiple alternatives.
Right.
Sam Frost has brought this out in his exposition of Matthew chapter 10, verse 23 about the, you will not finish the cities of Israel before the Son of Man be come. And he's pointed out that there's other alternative ways of looking at this verse where you don't have to look at it and say, well, hey, they had finished the cities of Israel by, say, AD 42 and Christ hadn't come yet. Well, that means Christ is a liar. He was a liar when Peter wrote his epistle. You don't have to have that mentality, because now you know that there's other ways of looking at those passages. But the preterists will oftentimes, they have one monolithic way of looking at certain passages, and they don't really, I think this prevents them from really understanding, because like I was telling Lance, they're caught in this sort of loop of circular reasoning. And when you start giving them evidence, you could see it just bounce right off, because they've not mentally prepared themselves to accept evidence. So they're not thinking inductively, they're thinking in sort of a deductive, sort of circular way. But once admit that, there's other ways of looking at a passage than just one particular way, then you've got pretty much evidence against any of these guys, really, even Preston.
Well, it's like the other day, Brian saw it, and maybe Roderick saw it, but I had a phone call from a full preterist the other day, and he asked me all sorts of questions, and it was about the resurrection of the dead. And I brought up Act 17 and I asked him why he's a Cartesian, which he didn't know what that was. And I'm like, why are you a Cartesian? Why don't you follow the Hebraic mindset? And it just like made this person like just go nuts from it because like, it completely baffled him because it was like, oh, well, the Greeks couldn't have believed it this way that I believe it because I'm doing the Hebraic mindset. Like, well, no, you're not, buddy. Like you're going actually the more of a Greco-Roman route with the afterlife and stuff. You're not going the Hebraic mindset like Paul, and but they can't accept certain facts and stuff because that blows away their paradigm and stuff. So then they might have to rethink it, and that's a challenging thing for somebody that's got such a rigorous like black and white view of things.
Right. That's the reason we've pointed out Max King operated in a vacuum. He didn't really, I mean, he had the time and effort he could have gotten back in the 1990s. He didn't really interact. Okay, you'll say he's an old man. It's the reason why he didn't get on the internet. But that's where preterism, full preterism really has launched on is the internet. If without the internet, it would have been probably just kind of relegated to wherever Max King was and didn't grow much. We had in the 1990s, and we looked at the chart already, but we had a crossover. So we had Max King having some influence, and he'd go into his study and write these 800-page tomes. But while this was going on, there were other influences of the preterist movement. And I think, let's see if I have my chart here so I can get to it, so I can make sure I have the names. We have, at the time, it was Walt Hibbert. Like I said, you mentioned earlier, rest his soul, because he passed on. But Walt Hibbert was instrumental, along with Ed Stevens, on getting J.S. Russell's Parousia back into print. And I think, I'm trying to remember, I think, was that the one? Maybe that was the one that R.C. Sproul wrote the forward to, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
And then Ed Stevens also helped launch John Noe's career. John Noe don't want to admit it, but if it wasn't for Ed Stevens helping publish John Noe's first couple of books, John Noe would also be a nobody. But John Noe has probably 20 books or more now, all about preterism. And then where's Don Preston? He's coming up, in the Covenant Eschatology, kind of competing with the Max King. Terry Hall, which was also from the Church of Christ and hung around Max King, one of his proteges. And then his son-in-law, Virgil Viduva, which ran the most influential social media site, I guess, Planet Preterist at the time. He was constantly holding, I think there was 3 conferences a year of full preterism. So these guys kind of took over the second generation of preterism through the 1990s to 2000s. Something happened and it started declining in the year 2000. Anybody want to kind of broach why they think that started falling apart in
I could give my insight as far as when I first came into it. I remember that it was basically the two meeting, I guess what you would call the points of meeting among full preterist minds, where basically you had a conservative trumpet run by Todd Dennis, was called Preterist Archive, and then you had the more liberal, I guess you would call it, trumpet of Virgil Viduva. It was called Planet Preterist. And if I recall, because I used to be a webmaster like back in 1998. And I remember the web back then, the internet back then, if you had a successful website, if you were a successful webmaster, you had a lot more influence than people than you could probably ever get today, because now everything is third party. So if you want to, be an influencer, you've really got to go through a third party platform. You've got to either go through your YouTubes or your Facebooks, social media platforms. Back then it was more common for people to actually, to start their own websites and to just get on the search indexes.
Yeah, if you had the knowledge to do that, you were good at that. Yeah.
You had to be good at it. And so Todd Dennis, he started his Preterist Archive, and I believe it was 1998 when I came along and accepted Preterism in 2005. His site was already like one of the major ones out there. And then right around 2000, I want to say around 2007 or maybe 2008, social media started to come out. Roderick, I don't know if you remember this, but do you remember when Ning came out?
Yep.
Ning. There was Ning platforms that were being developed. And it was a precursor to Facebook, but they kind of, for some reason, they only lasted a couple of years. But those sites right there was a particular platform. It was called
Sovereign Grace Preterist.
Yeah, Sovereign Grace. And then there was another one called Death is Defeated. And
Right.
those were the ones, those were where we used to interact. We were never allowed on those forums, but we used to go over to D.D. Warren's site and we used to interact via the comments. And that was where we did, that's where I had a lot of my interactions with Frost and others. There was another guy out there, Paul Gates. I don't know whatever happened
Oh,
to
yeah.
him. There were a few people, when I left Full Preterism, right on the heels of Todd Dennis and his crew leaving Full Preterism, there was really only like 5 of us doing this. There was me, there was you, Roderick, there was Paul Gates, there was D.D. Warren, there were maybe a couple of other people. But I remember that the social media, once social media came out, it started, I think things started really fracturing, at least from my observation, with the advent of social media. Things started disintegrating. And I don't know whether that's just
Yeah, you'd think it would grow, but instead it had the opposite effect. It really
Yeah.
fractured the entire movement into all these different flavors of Full Preterism now. I mean, like you said, there was that conservative group and more of the liberal group going on at the time for a while. I mean, you had Dave Green was part of the conservative. You had Sam Frost he was kind of straddling the fence because he used to try to talk with Virgil Viduva, but he kind of straddled the fence between this conservative. I think he was trying to consolidate it, but it never worked. So, and Ed Stevens was more of a conservative kind of group. And then you had Don Preston, who didn't even want to get into the battle at that time. Like, we kept pushing him. Pick a side? Which side are you for the Universalist? Are you for the for the more the Sovereign Grace people? So I just don't. It just boom went away like that. It was pretty quick, I think. I don't know if we can point to any specific person. I know that your departure, Todd Dennis's departure, Sam Frost, my departure a little bit before Sam Frost, and Sam Frost's departure. You have all these departures that are going on for Full Preterism. Maybe that had something to do with it, but now it's just a bunch of random people I've never heard of that have no idea about Max King. They have no idea about Don Preston, and they're glad. They're willfully ignorant. They're like, oh, it's okay. I don't know anything about them. You don't know anything about the persons that basically articulated and helped formulate the entire movement you're part of. No, I just read the Bible and became to Full Preterist.
Yeah, bull. That's a bunch of baloney. As a matter of fact, there's a guy I'm going to be discussing. Hopefully, I'll be having a sit down with him this week via podcast. It's just going to be an interview back and forth. And he swore up and down that he's only reads the Bible. He doesn't read any other books. Well, Max King passed away a couple of days ago. I saw him give some kind of eulogistic sort of blurb on one of the, I think it was one of Larry Siegel's posts saying, Max King, defender of the faith. He's a hero. How'd you know about Max King if you've never read any other book about the Bible? They know who these people are. They just don't want to pay tribute to them. They don't want to admit that they've influenced their understanding.
And that's one reason we have this podcast today, because it seems like somebody that important shouldn't just have oh, by the way, passing by Don Preston. I don't know if we have that audio, but Don Preston was talking about his passing, Max King. Don Preston said something to the effect that he didn't agree with a lot of things he said in his latter days. He didn't specify what those were. But the thing I found interesting, Don Preston said that anytime he had a conversation with Max King, it was frustrating because Max King would always not answer directly. He would kind of, push it back on Don Preston, which is one thing that preterists get mad about us. When I don't answer directly, false premise question, yes or no, have you stopped beating your wife? When I don't answer these kind of questions, these gotcha questions, they get upset. You can't answer. See, I got you. No, I'm not answering your false premise. So that's the reason why I just found it interesting that Don Preston pointed that out about his own,
his own mentor.
Mentor, yeah.
Well, I'm convinced that like it was just mostly like how when two of the same personalities clash. And then they're like, oh, I hate that guy. And it's like, well, you're an ENFP and he's also an ENFP. So it's like you're gonna butt heads because the same personalities can't stand each other. So it's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black there, I guess. He probably found it frustrating because, oh, well, that's what he does. And it's being put back on him, But yeah, what do we have that clip?
I don't know.
As a matter of fact, we do. Let me go ahead and share it. I just got to drag it up and let's see, share my screen again. I'm getting better at this.
We're technologized. This is the 21st century.
Not quite
yeah, we're getting good at this.
We're getting better. We're not as good as some people, but we're getting there. Let's see. So it will be this one right here.
Yep, it's that red one there. straight up. There you go.
Let's get this stupid thing to disappear so I can click on it. Here we go. Okie dokie. So this is it right here. And I believe this is where it was bookmarked.
Back up a little bit to 21.
My experience with
Oh, that's good. That's good. It's fine. My experience, you had it.
my experience with Max was he can be slightly frustrating, and I don't mean that in any kind of a negative way, but you could sit down with him and you could ask him Bible questions, and he very seldom gave you a direct answer. He would say, well, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on that passage? What does your research lead you to believe? And you're going, that's not what I asked.
Yeah, good enough.
And so again, I'm not saying that in any kind of a negative sense. He wanted people to study.
Okay.
He wanted people to make up their own minds. And so that was ever so slightly frustrating, somewhat humorous. I don't know that I've ever met a more humble man.
Good enough.
You can agree or disagree with his theology. Okay, that's not the point here. The point of it was that he was an extremely humble man. He was a man of very, very strong convictions, make no mistake, but he was a very humble man. And he knew what he was going, he knew the controversy that would be created when he presented his views. And he was vilified, ostracized, condemned, disfellowshipped. I never heard him utter an angry or bitter word. Now that says a lot. It says a lot of his spirit. And so, anyway, like I said, in case you didn't know it, for those of you who knew of or knew him, and is certainly a sad time in some ways. And again, I don't care if you agree or disagree with his theology. That's not the point. If you knew the man, then you knew what a fine man that he was. And so you had to respect his courage. You had to respect his gentility. You had to respect his humility. It's just like I've said many.
Okay, so I'm going to stop right there because so that was his eulogy,
Yes.
if you will.
And it's fine, but the problem is with that, it's just because somebody is ostracized and vilified doesn't make them noble. I'm not saying he wasn't, but that's not what makes somebody noble. I mean, you could be a flaming LGBTQ person and you're being ostracized and vilified, but is your cause noble is the thing. I don't care how you're responding back. Was the cause noble? I mean, if he knew, according to what Don Preston says here, that what he was presenting was outrageous. You know, we said that in, I think one of his books says that he knew he was going to challenge the dogma of those people, blah, blah, blah. Then you got to realize what's going on. Like, for example, I sometimes post things that purposely, I know they're a little pointed, you know, to get a response. I know that I do that, you know, how to debate a preterist, you know, put down, you know, that I do that on purpose. And I know that. So I can get a response, because otherwise, if you just say, hey, here's a book about how to debate press, you want to look at this, who's going to respond? No one. It doesn't make a person noble. But the point I was looking at is the fact that he was talking about how he wouldn't give a direct answer. Preterists get so upset when you don't give them a direct answer based on their narrative. No, I won't give you a direct answer based on your narrative, especially when we're talking about, you know, see, Jesus was about to soon at hand come. Well, yeah. Look at Matthew 26:64. He definitely did come before the Father, you know, and Daniel 7:13, he came just like he said he would. And, you know, he was validating his messiahship.
Right. Yeah. Well, we were talking earlier about like, what do you think caused the decline, like with Max King and them? And I think a lot of it is apologetics, honestly. Like people can't just constantly be asking all these questions and then like not ever go and try to find the answers, you know? So like, I mean, some of that works for some people if they're grifters like Don, you know, where it's like, oh, I'm not going to answer any question, but I'm going to ask you like 50 questions in response to your question, and then I'll never answer your question. Right. But like, I think apologetics really did like kick Full Preterism's butt for the 2000s, because you know, you get on Planet Preterist and you're starting to like ask questions. You formed a group and now you're asking questions like, well, what do we do now? Like we all agree on this part, but like I'm starting to wonder about election here. I'm wondering
Yeah,
about
why you call yourself a pastor if you're a preterist? I thought you said
Yeah.
pastors are done with, that the chief shepherd already came and rewarded the pastors. But I was a hyper preterist. I got upset that Sam Frost and some of these other guys were running around calling themselves pastors. Pastors of
Right.
what? You know, the
Yeah.
church, from what you guys said, is basically done its due and it's done. So
Right. Yeah, and you know, theology, you have to, like I think St. John Chrysostom says that you have to be able to apply it to your life and make it work. Otherwise it's like bad theology, you
it's
know?
pointless, yes.
Yeah, and well, full preterism, it started to happen to people where they're like, you know, why do I have to stay with my wife? I could just
Yeah.
cheat on her and do this. Spiritual death is not a sin, right?
Yeah,
And then
I'm
you'll
not
have
judged
another-
anymore.
Yeah, and then you'll have another guy that's like, well, no, it's not actually this because I read it this way, and well, it's only for the believer. And then it's like, okay, that whatever, okay, like, and you just keep getting this back and forth, and finally somebody's like, you know, I think we're all being stupid. I think we should just all leave this thing, you know.
Yeah.
And then they
It's
leave.
funny, you look at those videos that we just looked at, Don Preston's, if you go to his video channel, I think he's on like episode, I don't know for certain, I joke about it, but he's like episode 600 on the Olivet Discourse. They seem to think that's a great thing to take basically one chapter and just pound it into the ground. It's expository. No,
Right.
it's ridiculous. How much can you parse these words and parse these words and parse these words until you're blue in the face? Exactly what he does.
You know what, guys, I think, and I've seen this just to segue off Lance's, what Lance just said a few moments ago. I've seen also, you know, not only, you know, people having trouble, you know, articulating their position, but I've seen that the response, the counter response has become more and more articulate over the years. So people, the more familiar people become with preterism and with full preterism, I noticed now they're starting to, you know, years ago it was like, you know, you could take
Caught
them
off guard.
back, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, they didn't know what they were getting into. Now it's like, oh yeah, I know this doctrine. So you're getting from, I mean, from ground level, you're getting, you know, great, you know, well articulated, you know, theological responses, even though I don't agree with everything that, you know, people are saying. I mean, Michael Brown, I think Michael Brown's a good guy, but I don't agree with everything. I don't agree with all of his theology, but you're getting, you know, this, you know, Michael Brown's debate with Gary DeMar, for instance, you got a more intelligent, articulated response from futurism than you would have gotten 15 years ago. So the tide is turning. I'm watching debates on, you know, the Gospel Truth and Jeremiah Nortier's channel, you know, where, you know, you've got futurists who, you know, by all rights, you know, they've never been preteristic in their theology. By rights, they shouldn't know this doctrine as well as they do, and yet they're articulating their responses in a much more, I would imagine, a much more legitimate theological way than they used to do years ago, where it was like, well, you know, they didn't know what they were doing. So there is that challenge to the preterist community that's going on now, because now that the doctrine, the more it spreads, the more familiar people get with those teachings, and so that they're able to think things over more. And now you're getting more articulated responses, which is really a death blow to hyperpreterism, in my opinion, because hyperpreterism generalizes everything. When you start looking at details, things start to crumble. So it's, to me, that's a sign that they need to get, if the hyperpreterist movement is going to last in any way, they need to get quicker on their feet, which is why I am inviting hyperpreterists to sit down with me and engage in real-time discussion, no delayed responses, fast, quick on your feet, immediate answers. You could throw something at me, I throw something at you. If you get me, catch me off guard, that's fine. If I'm wrong about something, I'll admit it. But they need to get quick on their toes, and they need to learn how to articulate their faith in a real-time environment, because these delayed, staged sort of responses.
Yes, the
are
written
not
written
working.
debates and stuff like that, where they have plenty of time to. They do a lot of that.
And they can't really win those either
No.
when they try to go at them. So
And we've seen that now recently, the move, and we talked about this on the last time, that the Israel only, to me at least, is one logical outlet for the preterist premises. We also talked about how universalism can also be a logical outlet. God doesn't judge anybody anymore, so everybody's saved, and things like that. And now with some of the mysticism, as you mentioned, Brian's coming in as well. So it is still developing. Preterism, the full preterism is developing in different ways. It's saying, oh, well, we can't stick with the 600th episode of Olivet Discourse like Don Preston is. We have to do something different. We have to understand how it's affecting our ecclesiology, our sociology. It's not just about eschatology. It's about all these other things. And I appreciate that. I appreciate them at least trying to apply their entire theology to everything they do. That's at least an honest way of looking at that.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. Like, now that Max King's died, like when Preston croaks, that's going to be like him and William Bell. I mean, those are the two like gatekeepers of like.
Right, that's the last one. They are basically, Don Preston basically is the face of preterism now.
Yeah.
Whether people like that or not, he is the face. Nobody has done as many debates. Nobody has been quick on their feet like Brian's saying they need to do as Preston has. There's nobody out there that holds a candle to him. So
Right.
Not even Sam Frost as much as he did when he was a full preterist. Preston still has him beat hands down when it comes to quick on his feet. So if you say, hey, I don't care about Don Preston, you're not really a serious full preterist, because that is your mouthpiece right there.
Yeah, unfortunately for them.
Yeah,
I
well-
gotta say too that one of his pluses is that he does seem to have that likable sort of exterior. That he's better as a public facing person. He's got more charisma. You get somebody like, and I mean, William Bell may be a nice guy, but I mean, he doesn't
It's
have
boring
charisma.
sounding when you hear him talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Rah, 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 rah. He's lecturing. Sometimes, at least Don Preston, he gets excitable. He starts moving, but he gets excitable. Starts to do. At least you have that. But catch the power of this and all that stuff. But still, if he's, to me, he just reminds me a little bit of a used car salesman. But that's my point. But he's still animated. So
yeah, because he was one. But yeah, I think that's where it's headed. Like, I don't know.
So when he passes on, what do you think is going to happen?
I think that either what's going to happen is they're going to go like the Mormon route, where they're going to have to go like, okay, we're going to make a new Bible. We're going to make a new like translation. Either that, or they're going to go IO, where it's just like, we don't give a crap about anything anymore. Like, it's all done. Like, it's a dead faith. Who cares? Or it's going to go like, some of them are going to try to go like actually studying stuff. But then there's going to be another like serious decline, because
who do you think might take over? So are they going to take over, or is there going to be any new leader?
I don't know. I'm
sorry, Don. I'm not trying to write your eulogy ahead of time, but you are coughing a lot. I'm kind of actually a little concerned. He coughs on every video he has. Maybe he's got.
He won't give himself a rest. That's the problem. The doctors told him, hey, look, you need to lay off this stuff for a while. He's not allowing himself to rest sufficiently. I mean, he could still write books. He could still write articles and stuff. But his real ministry is that public facing, is, your YouTube videos, your public content where you have to stand up your debates. And that's the thing. Now he's getting in an argument, I should say a debate, with an atheist. I believe it's coming up in April. And the funny thing is, he was actually just on an atheist YouTube channel. I think it was last month. And the thing that got me was this, is, with these atheists, these mythicists, these agnostics, the Bible's just a collection of contradictory documents. Yep. Right, they're written different times by different people. Some of them have different agendas. They're trying to prove this. But then now when somebody like Don Preston comes on, now all of a sudden the Bible's allowed to have a consistent narrative. Now all of a sudden everything is allowed to agree, except just not agree with evangelical Christianity. So it's what they're really doing is there's a link. Yeah, there's a link between these more extreme forms of full preterism like IO, especially where they verge into like, say, mythicism and agnosticism. There's a link between those extreme forms and more conservative forms like the kind that Don are preaching, because ultimately at the end of the day, when they sit down at the discussion table, they're going to agree with each other more than they agree with someone, say, who's a Christian like myself, mainstream Christian. They're going to end up agreeing with each other. And that, to me, is I'm seeing more and more of that every day. I'm seeing people who are full preterists, they're promoting atheist materials. They're promoting, I'm not mentioning names, but Lance, you know who I'm talking about. They're promoting atheist channels. They're promoting atheist scholars, people who say Christ is dead. He never rose from the dead. He's not God. They're sitting in on their classes. And anyways, I'm going to shut up. Let one of you guys say, but there's a connection.
I agree with you to some extent, but I also think like, say like Derek from Miss Vision, like he's not going to let, like if he was in a debate with Don, he's not going to let Don just get away with like, blah, 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 you know, like he's not going to let him get away with that. Cause I've been told plenty of times that me and Derek have a very similar mindset about stuff, which is funny to me, but because I
look like his younger brother, maybe. To me,
I know
he's got
I've
the red hair
heard
and
that
everything.
before, the hair and everything, you know.
You're not the cooler younger brother though. You're kind of like,
yeah, I'm not
like a
cool.
nerd.
Yeah, I'm the nerdy one. I'm like, oh no, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, I don't think that they're going to. I think the more apologetics that keeps getting popped up, I just think that full preterism is going to go through like a very like rough time. And I also wonder to myself, like, is the Unitarian types, are they gonna be like the ones that get going with it? Because like
they tried this before back. It's called, we call it preterist universalism. I didn't even know what back I was calling it preterist universalism. And then when you wrote it out, it was PU and I didn't mean to. And they thought I did it on purpose. Like, well,
Right.
it is kind of fun. So you don't think of Michael Miano or anybody's going to step into the place when Don goes away?
I can see him trying to, but like he already doesn't like, and I'm not trying to be mean, like he just doesn't have like the following. He does have a little bit of like, maybe he would be the face, maybe like in the Don Preston camp, but I don't know, because like I've seen him do this before where like he was telling them like, I'm going to read Michael Heiser, right? And then I'm going to all of his stuff about preterism, I'm going to refute it. Well, he reads it, and then like 2 months later, he hasn't put anything out, and everyone's like, well, when are you going to put that out? And he's like, I decided not to. And it's like, oh, okay, well, why did you do that? Oh, it's because you couldn't refute it. Like there's an actual scholar here, you know. And I just like, at least Don, like, well, he doesn't even do that either, but Don will like cherry pick like, well, N.T. Wright says this, so therefore I'm going to convolute it to make it sound like he agrees with me. So therefore N.T. Wright is wrong because I'm right, because I'm Don Preston. And then you're like, what? Okay, whatever. But like, at least he's making some kind of effort. Michael Miano's not going to make an effort with it. He's going to read it and be like, unless it like will actually really affect him. Like everyone's like, hey, Michael, why don't you answer this question? Like, and then he doesn't, like, you know, like besides that, it's not going to happen. I don't see, Michael Miano doesn't have like the apologetics.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
and all the rest of them have already like disappeared. Like Alan Bondar, he's off doing whatever now. And
Dale Vaughn, Brian Martin, I think his name is, from the Covenant Creationist. We have Ward Finley out there. I mean, you have all these guys that they're just not making any mark on the world anymore, I don't think. So you're right. I can't see anybody right now, but maybe somebody will come out of the woodwork. I know there's a lot of new IO guys, but they're also not much. They're all over the place. There's no way they're going to be able to
the IO, what's going to happen with that is somebody's going to finally point out, hey, Jews and Gentiles are different people. It's not this weird whatever they make it. They try to make it like Jews and Gentiles are the same or whatever. Like, okay, like whatever. Like it's not going to work out. Now, when you actually get to the most interesting part is like, well, how can you be saved after 70 AD? Like that part's the interesting part. That's the good part about IO. Like, because they've been actually trying to be consistent, and they point that out. You know, they get the opposite version of Max King here, where it's like, well, if all Israel is saved, then Max King's like, well, all Israel is saved, so everyone's saved. And they're like, well, if all Israel is saved and all Israel was the elect, then everyone was elected.
Yeah, they're taking Max King's and their premises to the logical conclusion. Max, wait a minute, I didn't mean. Right. Well, sorry, it's sort of like Gary DeMar. And I think we're getting ready to end here, but Gary DeMar has being challenged by Kenneth Gentry here lately, because
Mhm.
Gary DeMar has been a staple in the full preterist movement for a long time behind the scenes. He's constantly was speaking at their conferences. He was saying things to them like, "You're my brothers. You're not heretics. You're doing the hard work." These are the things he was saying to them back in the 1990s. I was there. I heard it, Gary. You can't deny it. But so a lot of his books have been used by partial preterists to become full preterists, but he doesn't want to take any responsibility. I don't take any. If somebody kept coming to some kind of conclusion from my books that I didn't intend, I would have to say, why did I not convey it right? I need to figure out and go back and try to fix it. But he doesn't want to take any responsibility for that. So
Right.
we don't know. Who knows what's going to come out? So go ahead. I'll shut up here and you guys finish up the last couple words.
Right. Well, sounds like we got another one in the can. I appreciate your gentlemen's time. This is always good doing one of these because we get a chance to hear different views. We also get a chance to hear, from people who, have, at least with you guys, who have a little bit more experience dealing with the movement, because I was out of the movement for so many years. But anyways, we're going to do another one soon. But thank you for whoever's watching this. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting our channels, all of our channels here. Don't forget to hit the subscribe buttons, and we'll be back soon. Until then, have a great rest of your day. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.